Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Resilience Growing Livestream. My name is Tobias. I'm from Farmwall. For those of you who haven't met me, of course, this is our first public session in the Resilience Growing program, so we're really excited to see some unfamiliar faces tonight, as well as some familiar faces. We're going to be hearing from Rebecca Scott tonight. I'm really excited to hear about the work that she's been doing, and just from her in general, a really interesting person, great, doing awesome work in the social enterprise sector in Australia. So looking forward to that. And yeah, we've got a few more people coming in from the looks of it, but decided to kick it off, stay punctual and everything. I'm just going to start, as we always do, with an acknowledgement. So I would like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which I am streaming from today. I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that I'm streaming from land that was never ceded. So before we get into it, I'm just going to pass over to Abby, who's going to run through some house rules. Nothing too crazy, just some general things we like to do in these live streams. So yeah, Abby, take it away.
Hey everyone, so basic house rules, make sure your audio is on mute. We'd love it if you could put your camera on if you feel comfortable doing so, and if you have a camera, so we're not speaking to blank faces. We highly recommend the gallery view, which you can access in the top right hand corner of your screen. In terms of questions, feel free to write them in the chat as they come to you, and we'll address the questions towards Beck during the Q&A at the end, and more admin-y type questions I will try answer throughout the call. Cool, and final one, most important one, be kind to each other. First time for everyone. Cool, I'll pass it back over to Toby.
Awesome. Well, not quite for everyone. We've got some resilience growers in here, which is pretty cool, and also some unfamiliar faces, which is really good to see as well. Just to give a bit of context as to like what this is. So Farmwall is an Australian ag tech startup, and we are running a program at the moment called the Resilience Growing Program, and it's essentially an online urban farming course where participants have learned how to grow food at home using aquaponics and hydroponics, as well as some other methods. And we are kind of taking them through a 14-week program where we teach people how to grow food, essentially, which is pretty cool. And one of the things that we have been doing with this program is doing weekly live streams, such as this on Thursday nights, where we've been bringing in guests from the ecosystem that Farmwall is in. So people who are working in this kind of sustainability business side of things in Australia and around the world as well. And basically just hearing them talk, lots of interesting people out there doing really cool work. And tonight's no exception. We're going to be hearing from Rebecca Scott, who is the CEO of STREAT and Moving Feast. So Beck is a Melbourne-based social CEO and co-founder of those organizations. Social enterprises that work with marginalized young people and providing them the ability to have a healthy self, job, and home through hospitality, as far as I understand. And they've also been doing lots of work helping people, vulnerable people with their food needs during the current crisis through the new social enterprise that they've created, Moving Feast. And so Becca's going to be telling us about all that and a bit more, I imagine. Interested to hear. And so we're going to hear from her first, and then we're going to do a little bit of a discussion afterwards. So I've got some questions for Beck, and at that point, if you guys have any questions as well, I can field them to her. So you can just write questions into the chat, and I will read them out to Beck towards the end of the session. Awesome. So yeah, without further ado, I think might pass it over to you, Rebecca, if that's okay.
Thanks very much. I can see that so many of you are eating your dinner right now, and I'm hoping your dinner, just like I've finished with my my partner and my son, has included some of your farm wall resilience growing sprouts. We had our radish sprouts tonight, microgreens, sorry. So we had some microgreens on our vegan pasta tonight, which were beautiful. I also just wanted to say huge kind of congrats to you guys for the incredible warp speed at which you engaged us all in your amazing growing stuff. We're really proud to be kind of one of those first families that kind of jumped in really early, and it's given us a really nice pandemic project. And also really lovely to see so many of our kind of peer social enterprises in the food system who are passionate about urban growing, kind of finding rapid ways to pivot during this kind of crazy pandemic. So yeah, and also too, just, you know, I think many of us have had been so glad for the time that we've been able to either put our hands in fish tanks or into microgreens or into soil if we're lucky enough to have a little patch of land during this pandemic, because I think it's been, you know, for most of us, it's been pretty critical to staying sane. I'll tell you first of all just a little bit about myself, but I am just going to ask you guys to also, maybe you, Abby, to just wave your hand if I get too passionate and I talk for too long, because this topic I get really excited about, and it's highly likely that I'll go over time. So
That's
don't
fine.
feel bad. It's all about just going, hang on, time for questions, because I'll get really passionate. So I'm just warning you. I guess from a personal perspective, I started life studying to be a plant biologist, and very quickly my final year plant professor at Newcastle Uni realised that I love drawing plants and talking about plants way more than looking under a microscope. And she applied for a scholarship for me to move to Canberra to the ANU to go and study science communication. And it was one of the most exciting things that has ever happened. So I ended up at the CSIRO for a decade in science communication. But I feel like I've never been able to take kind of, you know, the green out of my veins rather than the blood out of my veins. So if you ever find me drawing, I'll forever be drawing plants. Every notebook that you ever get, any of my work notebooks will just be covered in plants, and every bit of paper, I have to feel like that sense of kind of rewilding everything. So in one sense, it's kind of not surprising that I'm finding myself kind of very much moving from the hospitality industry into what I would say kind of the food system more generally, but you know, dreaming a lot about what it looks like to rewild this city, and actually do some really exciting kind of future work. So I ended up kind of unexpectedly as a social entrepreneur back in 2004 when I stumbled upon a social enterprise in Hanoi, and then made the jump myself into social enterprise. And the thing that I was really passionate about in that kind of early days, I guess, is really, it was the social enterprise business model, and finding essentially a business model to address a really complex social issue like homelessness. And the thing I described it to someone, saying that I really felt like when I lifted up the bonnet on homelessness, I couldn't believe that as a country we were thinking about homelessness a lot as a housing issue, and it's just far more complex than that. And it just felt like unless we could provide training and employment pathways for people into, you know, sustainable livelihoods, we were never going to address the issue. So we chose hospitality as the industry to build our social enterprise in, because it's got a bunch of characteristics of the industry that are quite critical for training and employment pathways. It's really accessible. There's a lot of, it's an industry that's very open to young men and young women and young trans people. So it's not quite as gendered as some other industries are. I love hospitality because it's one of those industries that you can bring the public and, you know, who are your customers right into the social change with you, and they can experience that with you. And I could keep going on. So it's a great industry, but right from our very first feasibility study, there has always been plans for us to be also doing urban farming alongside our hospitality work, but knowing that would come after we established hospitality businesses. So We've just turned 10. In fact, we were supposed to have our 10th birthday on the first weekend of lockdown. So we've never actually celebrated our 10th birthday, even though it was the 15th of March months ago. But when I always had I had given myself a 10-year goal to essentially build a sustainable social enterprise model and then transition the organization so a really competent team could run it, and then I could work on bigger system work, and that very much being in kind of urban food systems. So I was going to say I think I've successfully done that, but obviously, all the bets are off, obviously, in the middle of a pandemic, running an organization that's in an industry that's, collapsed and on its knees. So actually, our existing business model no longer actually exists, or in a very kind of precarious way. But what I'm really passionate about, I guess, is, where kind of social and environmental change can coexist. So it's kind of people and planet. And the thing that I became really became so obvious, I guess, so rapidly in this pandemic, is we were about to go into a time where the whole world would be facing this enormous kind of crisis in this pandemic. We were going to have all of these people who were unemployed and, as we faced economic downturn. So we were going to have this real strain on our food system at exactly the same time as all of these hospitality and food social enterprises were about to go under because their markets had disappeared. And it just made no sense that we couldn't bring those two things together and try and solve a problem. So it was really that first week of the pandemic that I speed dialed a whole bunch of friends in the social enterprise sector and said, what's life looking for you? What's life looking like for you kind of in these coming months? And most of us, haven't been around for a really long time. We don't have big balance sheets. We don't own properties. We don't have all of that kind of bigger, I guess, kind of reserves of cash and capital the same way as, big traditional old nonprofits might have. So it was really clear that most of us were going to be doing pretty tough. And I just said, well, how about we do some work together? What if we tried to do a pivot kind of as a whole collection of us, and we used all of those incredible facilities we had, those, teams and hundreds of chefs, and all of those amazing people that we've got, and then put that in the service of essentially the food relief system in the first instance, to keep our doors open, but let's work longer term on to build a fair and regenerative food system, on the other side of the pandemic. And I guess what was so clear to me is I spend a lot of time, I guess, kind of thinking about what this city might look like in 2040 or 2050, and it was so clear that, I always think about this pandemic as it's a kind of a nested crisis. We've got, of course, it's a major international crisis, but actually we're in a way bigger crisis, which is the climate crisis. And so what does it look like to do, long-term strategic work, but knowing that there's so much disruption in the system right now? It's an incredible opportunity to redesign the system. When we're changing so many parts of the system all at once and they're all in flux, and we've got changes to the way we work and the changes to the way we get our food and changes to the way we socialize, all of these things are in a system and in flux. And what that means is, that means there's an incredible opportunity for innovation. So I guess I was really enlivened just by the opportunities that exist there right now to say, hey, you know what, the status quo kind of sucked anyway. There's a whole bunch of stuff about the status quo that we really weren't happy with. What does it look like if we grab a whole heap of parts of the future and pull them forward right now into our work in these next couple of years? The thing that I guess what I'm passionate about with food is that, like I said earlier, it's where, people and planet meet. It's where social and environmental kind of come together. And whichever way you look at it, whether or not it be, if you take a pure kind of carbon and sequestering carbon sort of approach, we've got great, research around the globe to show that, out of all the different industries that could be making a difference, the food system is so critical to kind of creating a safe world. But then if you look at some of the other major crises that we have, so with, for example, human health, you can see that once again, the food system is critical to that. So I love the food system because there's hardly any other system that you can look at that if you don't address it, it doesn't have kind of multiple intersections with other major problems that we're trying to solve. And I think it's that kind of intersectionality that helps us decide where those acupuncture points are. I guess from a personal perspective, we've got one tiny little life. If we're incredibly lucky, we might live to 80, and that's just such a fleeting time in the history of the planet. But the decisions that we've made in this last number of decades, and the squandering that we've done of, certainly this last 30 years since it was very apparent that rapid climate change was happening. The fact that the stuff that we've done, the tail of those decisions, depending on what science you read, it's 3 to 10 million years it's going to take to recover. Now we can't conceive of that kind of recovery rate and the destruction that's already well underway in this, sixth extinction event. And so for me, it just brings into focus, I guess, so acutely, this tiny little window of opportunity that we've got right now to do absolutely transformational change. But if we're going to do that, we've got to know where to put the acupuncture needle. It's a big system that's messy, and if we're going to put the acupuncture needle somewhere, that we want it to be doing systemic change, not just kind of playing around the edges. So I guess where I've kind of arrived at personally is I'm really interested in kind of what I would call more now kind of system entrepreneurship, and say, what does it look like to not just work as siloed organizations and social enterprises, but what does it look like to integrate and to build together and to build collective responses to these challenges? And social entrepreneurs are my favorite people in the world. They think big, they get shit done, they're creative in their thinking, they're resourceful, they're not motivated for personal gain. They just, they're my kind of people. And I guess what it was really clear is I just wanted to spend the rest of my career working alongside like-minded people and saying, let's do this together rather than doing it, in a siloed way. So Moving Feast, really, it's still in its absolute infancy. It's this tiny little collection of food social enterprises. There's about 20 of us kind of at this early stage, anywhere from from social enterprise growing activity, so horticulturists and farmers, through to cooks. So teams like mine, we've got 11 hospitality businesses, so chefs and bakers and baristas and coffee roasters, and then we've got kind of the delivery supply chain sort of stuff that's in there. So Fruit to Work is a social enterprise that does a lot of fruit boxes and pick and pack delivery stuff around the city. And what does it look like actually if we try and integrate all of this activity into one great big, humming, cohesive system where we can hand on heart know the provenance of our food. We can, that there's not a single mouthful that we could take of a plate of food that comes through this system, and know that we're getting more impact, that we can point to the supply chain and say, this is how much good has been done through every mouthful that we're eating, and let us show you how. But also that we can build a movement of people who are passionate about this stuff. So if I was kind of dreaming about, I wrote a list, so forgive me, but just before I came into here, I just wrote a list of, what are my dreams, what could we build together in this next, let's say, decade. So I think it's too late to say 2 decades. We're not being ambitious enough if we don't push for 1 decade. So here's my top 13 things that I want us to build in the next decade. And when I say us, I mean all of us. And the only reason that Farm Wall team didn't get a speed dial in that first one is because they've kind of been busy themselves. So I'm extending the ask to anyone who's passionate about food system work, anyone who wants to get on and collaborate with others to do it, and then all those people who want to eat fair and regenerative food as part of their life. So the things that I'm hoping for, first of all, I'm really hoping that we find more effective ways of connecting First Nations knowledge into our current food system. You know, Melbourne is placed where it is because it's on a food bowl. It was there for 60,000 years in this lush food bowl where we have this incredible, Birrarung River, which was the intersection of 4 different food ecosystems, a saltwater ecosystem, a freshwater ecosystem, a marshland, and a kind of fields. And all of this amazing food with all of this incredible richness. And because there was incredible food here, it also meant that it's a meeting place, a cultural place. And so I guess what I'm passionate about is thinking about, well, what would it look like to reimagine the city through that lens and say, well, that Birrarung River has been the lifeblood of this place. What would it look like if we tried to restore that food bowl? And of course, it's not going to be the same, but what would it look like if we started to think about Melbourne as a food bowl again, the same way as we did all of those generations ago? So I dream of, for example, that the tops of all of the buildings in this city are part of an enormous distributed urban farm, that you might go onto 101 Collins Street to an orange grove and pick all your oranges, but you might go down to the other end of Collins Street and go and pick all the olives on top of, another building down there, and there's an amazing olive grove down there. That, further up the street you might have, some other amazing orchard of stuff that's happening. But then down at ground level, we'd have all this kind of rich community infrastructure, and that we would set ourselves a goal that every single person in this city who wanted their own little patch of land to farm on would have it. Okay, some might want a bigger spot, but some of us only want a little spot. So what would it look like to give ourselves, for the city to make a commitment to every resident that it could have its own farm? And if I think about the incredible efforts that we've seen in the past, those victory gardens that were made during war times when every space in a city, was used for growing. We have so much land in this city that would be ideal for our growing activities. And I just imagine, what would it look like to rewild this city, with amazing greenery and urban landscapes? So that was number 1 and 2. 1, 2, and 3, sorry. Number 4 is, I would love to see us have a farmers market embedded in every single community in this city, that none of us would have to go far to go to a farmers market, that those markets would be full of people, local producers and small producers, that the more food that we were growing right in the city as well, the more variety we would have, but we would also, all the other products that we could be value adding from that urban farming as well. So I love that idea. I've been to New York, a couple of times, and just, it feels like, every street you walk down, you're only ever a couple of streets away from a farmer's market. And it's not just a Saturday or a Sunday, you often get a midweek market. So this really rich, America's got a really rich farmers market culture. So what would it look like for us to have that here in Melbourne? I want us to have a social enterprise supermarket. We just can't have a functioning food system where we've got 90% of our food being brought through Coles and Woolies. I mean, that is just the antithesis of a functioning food system. So we just have to, stop that dominance. And I get excited when I say, well, what would it look like if we built a people's supermarket? A supermarket where all of this fair and regenerative, food growing could have a regular place where it was being sold. So my dream is a social enterprise cooperative supermarket and grocer. Oh, we are an absolutely terrible food waster as a city, but also as an industry. So the hospitality and food retail sector is at the very, very top of waste in industries in this city. And appallingly, my industry has such low levels of landfills, and I think about all of that incredible organic waste that ends up going to landfill that could be growing more food in this city. And so I just think it's an absolute crime that we have all of this rich organic matter that should be future food for us, but what we're doing is putting it into landfill, and it's in an anaerobic environment. So I want us to really start to think far more deeply about waste rather than just kind of playing around the edges of that. And I also think from that waste, we've got so many opportunities for new circular economy, activities and all of that kind of closed loop thinking. There's so much opportunity for new enterprise development. So I would love to see this kind of blossoming of tiny little food entrepreneurs who want to get in there and try some stuff, but that what we've done as kind of more established social entrepreneurs is maybe built some of that infrastructure and that kind of common, those commons that we need, infrastructure that doesn't have to mean that as a young startup social entrepreneur in the food system that you've got to somehow raise all this money to be able to do stuff, that there's facilities and open access sort of stuff and knowledge and all of that kind of knowledge commons that could be there in this food system if we started to make everything that we were doing accessible. If I was kind of holding up a community that I love, that I would use as the pin-up for that, it would be the precious plastics community. That community, the global precious plastics community is my absolute pin-up of what it looks like when you build, an open innovation system around a problem. So that incredible, global recycling community, but I can link up with a community anywhere else in the world and get downloads of equipment and knowledge and find my local people who are passionate in the same stuff. So I think that community has done exceptionally well. And for those of you who haven't followed it, go and look at Precious Plastics. They've just put out version 4, so it's their next iteration of knowledge, and it's a really big leap forward. They've been going for a number of years, but just this last year, they've really done some extraordinary stuff in building that global community. So I think our food system actually needs a precious plastic approach to how we think of knowledge and open innovation. Of course, I'm going to forever remain passionate about providing training and employment opportunities into this urban food system for our most marginalised young people. I can't conceive that we would be in a country where we would have young people who come to us as early as 16 and have nothing to look forward to because their intergenerational poverty is going to mean that they could never have opportunities. And I think the urban food system is such an exciting training and industry to kind of help create those opportunities for young people. And actually on that, we start STREAT starts its own first small urban farm at the Collingwood Children's Farm in the next couple of months. So we're just going into partnership with them and cultivating community to start our first training and employment pathways into urban agriculture for young people. So actually, even though our hospitality businesses are all haven't got young people in the moment because they're all closed, or most of them are closed, we'll actually be reopening probably first with urban farming for our young people, which I'm so excited about. There are a whole heap of people who have come to this country as refugees and migrants who have this incredibly rich knowledge and food system knowledge, and they are locked out of land, they are locked out of opportunities. And when I talk to my dear friends at the peer social enterprise cultivating community, they'll talk to me about people in the high-rise flats that are just coming out of, fortunately, lockdown now, but people who who had enormous farms back in their countries and were incredible farmers, and they've got one tiny little piece of land, and that tiny little community garden at the bottom of those flats is so precious to them. But they're used to having land and being incredibly, proficient farmers. So I'm passionate about what would it mean for us to find those people, farmers who don't have land but know how to farm or have aspirations to farm. What would it look like for us to find that right land for them? So a lot of the work that, social enterprises like 3,000 Acres and Orico and Farm Next Door, great projects that are trying to find, underutilized spaces. Some of them a bit more, urban, some of them more regional, but trying to connect people who passionately want to farm with farming land. I want to see how growing and urban farming can just do, reconnect us to land. I think, so much to nature, and so much of our pandemic, I think, has been, for those of us who have been under lockdown for months and months, so much of, I know for myself, so much of my own personal sanity has come from just the furious amount of gardening that I've been doing. I probably have, my guess is probably at least 500 food plants growing in the backyard. It's a very, very, very tiny backyard. So a lot of those are in, pots and containers and, things that I found. So it's not all ground that it's in. But also too, in that kind of reconnecting us to nature, that what that provides is opportunities, particularly for our children, for our children that we're raising in cities. I'm a country kid. I came from country New South Wales, and I'm used to having lots and lots of land around and lots of soil to dig in. But, my son Will is being raised as a city kid. And so, that trying to use whatever bit of land that we've got to kind of get children engaged in, this next generation of children engaged in urban farming as well. And the Farm World project, I think, has been such a beautiful example of that. Just so many of us have wanted to join this with our children, and it's become a real focal point for our families. And of course, all of that slowing down stuff, helping us spend time with our families. I would love to think that our urban farming activity also just changes our perspective on our dominance as a human species, that it gives us more opportunity to think about biodiversity more generally, and what it looks like to be in a world with so many other species that we are currently, we are endangering so rapidly. So what does it look like for us to be treating, other species with respect, and changing our own view of ourselves in that process? Number 12 is, I'm passionate about the work we've got to do in human health. That we've got to be able to see food as, sustainable, regenerative food as medicine, rather than the stuff that we pile into ourselves. And it just makes no sense that we kill ourselves, that our ways of dying right now are through killing ourselves with our food. So we have to use food for our health. And then I guess the other thing is just, what does it look like, I guess, outside, out of the pandemic, to reimagine this city and help our food enterprises help us rejuvenate the city. We know that this city is going to look like, it's going to, look very, very different for, probably forever, actually. But I'm excited because, so many social enterprises and small businesses haven't been able to be in the city because the rents have been so high. We've all been forced kind of out of the city as the city just got more and more ridiculously frenetic and obsessed with its, its big businesses. But what does it look like if we say, let the food social enterprises of this city help us regenerate this city, and this is what we want the city to be like, and this is our dreams for the city. And some of you might know the work that Marcus Westbury did in Newcastle. I grew up about an hour outside Newcastle, and for those of you who remember the Newcastle earthquake that happened, that decimated the city, but also too, the city was coming off the back of being a blue collar city for years and years and years. And the city, the main street of Newcastle, at the end of my teenage years and going into my 20s, just was becoming a ghost town. And that kind of creativity of groups like Renew in Newcastle that essentially use the vibrance of smaller startup social enterprises and arts organizations and all of this kind of vibrant little experimental stuff was how that city was rebuilt, as all of those small enterprises were given tiny little pop-ups and short-term leasing and could take a punt on something. They didn't have to sign up to these 5 or 10 year, leases of buildings or pay $1 squillion rent. They had these, these little moments in time to innovate and try new stuff. And I'm really excited about the opportunity that I think that we have to say, well, actually, this is what we want the city of Melbourne to look like, and jump in there and start to try a whole bunch of stuff. So that's and I know the second I lie in bed tonight, I'll think of another 10 things that I forgot to mention, but that's kind of the top 13 things right now that I could think of that I'm dreaming for this city, and why I think, the sort of stuff that Farm Wall's doing, but a whole bunch of the other food social enterprises are doing, not just critical right now in this pandemic, but also really critical to the long-term future of this city. And actually, I think the innovation that we can do here in this city, absolutely could be kind of globally innovating. So I get really excited about, I don't know if any of you have ever kind of done things like in an Instagram feed, just put in the words rewild. But, so much of my Instagram feed is amazing pictures of cities that are just wild cities now and are overgrown. That's what I want Melbourne to look like. That's the kind of city that I want my son to grow up in. And that's the kind of city that I want his children to grow up in as well. So that's it really from me. Over to you guys for questions. Sorry, that's a monologue. I'd love to have questions.
That was amazing. That's such a good talk. And so, obviously, your passion is infectious. And a lot to really dig into there. It's hard to know where to start.
Sorry, I'm going to add one more thing. I can't believe I didn't say this in my 13th. I'm going to add my 14th, and it's what I've been doing all of this pandemic is just trying to get the food relief system and the city to realise that culture and cultural heritage has to be part of food. So the richness that we have when we have a city that one in every 3 people in this city hasn't got English as a first language and has come from another country, all of that richness and culture that we've got in that food knowledge and those food traditions, we just have to use that as part of the way we connect and come together over food. Sorry, I'm sure I'll think of something else, but that's enough.
Absolutely. Thanks for for mentioning that, because it does tie into a question that I'm sure a few of us have about what's happened in the social housing buildings this week in Melbourne. And I'd be really interested to hear about the work that you guys did this week with Moving Feast, and give us some, if you could provide, tell us what it was like on the ground, that'd be pretty awesome. But also whenever something like that happens, there's always a lot of calls for more socially aware responses. Like, how can we design more socially aware responses to situations like that? And so I'd love to hear your perspective. Like, if you would design a sort of a response team who addressed a situation like that with the lockdowns in those buildings, providing the food packages, but also supporting the people in those communities, how would you do it? What would you design?
I mean, I think there's no doubt that, the state has had to make some very, very hard calls and decisions that you'd never want to make as a leader, to have to lock people into their homes. So I absolutely empathize with just with having to make those decisions. But those households are examples of old infrastructure in this city that needs to be bulldozed. If you don't even have a little balcony to grow anything on, and you don't have a window that you can open, and you don't have a way of kind of connecting yourself back to nature, last night when I was delivering all of our food, so I was in Tower 5 on Racecourse Road last night for about 4 hours delivering our food. And you know, I can't imagine what it's like, you know, to be sitting in the tower and your tiny little community garden plot is down. You can see it, you know, you can look out your window and you can see your plot in the garden, and not know how long you're going to be locked up for, but also knowing that tiny little community plot is so critical to your family's food security, and also so critical to getting the ingredients and the food that is special for you and is part of what, you know, critical to your diet. So I think one of the things that was really distressing was just thinking that we were going to have all of these people, you know, thousands of residents in there, and no one had stopped to think, well, hang on, you know, do we have any halal meals around the place? Like, you know, how can we as a country you know, within 2 days of the pandemic, you know, put $60 million across into our food relief system and not thought about cultural diversity and how we're going to, you know, cater to different cultural groups. So I have a frustration about the fact that it feels like we've been flat-footed, you know, and part of me is frustrated because, of course, you know, we could see all of this stuff coming. You know, we could see what was happening in Wuhan in January. So we could have predicted that we would have, you know, outbreaks in public housing with a large amount of, you know, highly vulnerable people in high density living where, you know, like Daniel Andrews said this week, it was equivalent of kind of vertical, you know, that kind of vertical cruise ships. So we saw what happened with the cruise ships. You know, we saw so fast the spread of the pandemic through those. So for me, it's been a frustration watching that happen, and I was glad, I guess, when I got a speed phone call, you know, on Sunday saying, I don't suppose Street's got any halal meals, you know, on stock that you could get to us. I'm like, actually, I could get you 1,700 in a couple of hours. So within literally a matter of hours, we had 1,700 halal meals that were going across into the flats, and within 24 hours, we had procured 5 tons of produce. The timing wasn't great, but obviously there was the Flemington lockdown happened last Friday. The announcement of it happened last Friday, and the Flemington farmers markets is normally on a Sunday, and so the decision to close, I had to make, you know, the Melbourne farmers market team had to make the decision very rapidly to close the Flemington markets on the following day, which meant there was all of these producers that were down, you know, down in the city. Some of them were accommodated across back into Alphington, but many of them couldn't be. There wasn't enough space. So we essentially brought all their crops, as much of their crops as we could buy. And I think we bought everything that some of the egg producers had. I think we had, I can't remember how many dozen eggs, but it was some phenomenal number. We just pretty much bought everything. And then within the first 24 hours, we're picking and packing that into culturally appropriate food and produce boxes, and did 500 boxes across 2 days that got delivered in. So I think it was just a really nice example of, you know, when you start to build these collaborative responses in a food system where all the actors that are playing in that space together are mission driven, so rather than profit driven, the speed at which you can start to do some things, you know, that you know who to speed dial. Last night, I guess, what we saw again and again and again. So I worked on floor 20, particularly, and did 2 rounds of food delivery to that floor. And there was, you know, young African mums with a whole heap of little kids to incredibly aged little Chinese woman who was there, through to, you know, young Malaysian, you know, mum, through to, like, there was just everything. It was such a melting pot there. And the gratitude, you know, despite whatever stuff you're seeing in the media or social media, like the gratitude for people when they would say, are these meals halal? And we would say, yes, they're vegetarian, vegan, and halal. And it was just this overwhelming sense of thank you for thinking of us. And I think that's the thing with food, you know, none of us use food just as a way to survive. Food isn't just nutrition. Food is a way of enjoying each other's company and coming together. Food is a way of expressing ourselves. Food is a way of you know, going on adventures with our taste buds. You know, food is a way for us to socially connect with each other. And I think, you know, when we make food just about filling stomachs and just about, you know, can we put something in your stomach so you're not hungry tonight, we are missing, you know, we strip every bit of dignity out of a household when we do that. So you know, my pride at being part of the group who had cooked last night was knowing that, you know, hey, we couldn't help with your lockdown situation and we know it's distressing, but this is just a little bit of love on a plate that says, we know that you're here. We know that that your culture is important to you, and we've seen you, and here's the tiniest little thing that we can do to help. And so the pride of that, I guess, and the significance of that, and each of those things is tiny, but each of those things is the difference between saying, we see you, we know you're there, and you know, we want to, we respect that, and we value that. So for me, I guess, you know, using food, I guess, as the thing that starts to break cultural barriers down and show empathy and compassion, I think is really critical. Having said that, I am so unbelievably relieved that people as of tomorrow can go out and get their own food and go and, you know, leave those towers, you know, obviously in a very limited way, but to go back out and have their own choice and be able to, you know, choose what they want to eat. So yeah, I just hope to goodness that we don't see other towers obviously starting to close down as well. But if they do, you know, hopefully we'll be on the front line once again, and you know, might get a speed dial again going, hey, have you got any halal meals? And it turns out we've got 2,000 in the fridge ready to go for the next time. So yeah, we're trying to be proactive and also, you know, have lots of conversations in the food relief system and say, you know what, not every African family wants to eat Weet-Bix, you know, even if it is stomach filler, you know, we understand that it's practical to pack, but, you know, let's just think a bit more broadly. And we've got the capability to be better than we are being right now in the food relief system.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. I agree with so much of what you've just said. It's, particularly the stuff around, I think how much it means, it shows how much you care about someone when you take an interest in what they're eating. You know, it's like you're interested in their well-being and also interested in them as a person, to like understand who they are and their culture and their beliefs as well. And, you know, what makes them tick, because I think it says a lot, you know, it helps paint the picture of who a person is, what they eat, you know. Got a few questions in the chat, which might be good to address. So STREAT has been going for quite a while now, 2009, over 10 years, like you said. Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
How far are you on your journey? So this question is, how far are you on your 10-year journey with STREAT so it can manage the flows and then step out into the bigger systems change? So I guess kind of where have you come from, and I guess where are you hoping to go to with STREAT?
So I set with my first board chair back in 2009, I said, I'm in for 10 years. I have no idea if this thing will work, but goodness knows I'm going to give it the best crack I can. And, you know, I'll work damn hard for that 10 years. And my pace is always sprint. I don't really have many speeds. It's kind of sprint or sprint faster normally. So I didn't kind of waste any time, but geez, we've fucked up a lot of things. Like, we have closed as many things as we've succeeded at. So it's been a very messy process. You know, if you looked at our feasibility study, it looks identical almost on the kind of kids that we're going to work with and why we're going to work with them, and what we're passionate about from a social mission perspective. But our business model is nothing like the business model that we envisaged. You know, by now we were supposed to be this enormous fleet of street food carts all over the city, and you know, that lasted about 6 months. So you know, our business model is not at all the same. So in one sense, I'm proud of our kind of social achievements with our young people. We've worked really intensively with about 500 young people over that time, and then probably kind of another 1,000 young people in shorter courses and outreach programs. But that 500 kids that we've worked really intensively with for up to a year with each of them, you know, we know that our program has been transformational for them. We know that their life expectancy is longer because they came through STREAT. We know that they're out of prison because they came through STREAT. We know that they're now, you know, the first batch of all of those first kids from 10 years ago are now all having their first own kids. And this is the first generation of their kids that hasn't been taken off them as they were taken off, you know, their parents and put into the child protection system and into foster care. So we've now been around long enough to start to see a generation of impact for those young people as they're coming into being young parents themselves. We've been fastidiously tracking data. So my lovely co-founder and wife, Kate, is a passionate kind of, you know, impact tracker. So she's got our chief impact officer. She's our clinical psychologist and does all of our impact mapping. And so it's been really lovely just to be collecting so much data over that decade and be able to see whether it's mental health or drug and alcohol addiction or juvenile justice rates or homelessness rates, you know, we know the program has been transformational on all of those accounts. And we know that, you know, if you're going to put a dollar into the, you know, existing job service system or you know, or into a program like ours, you'd back us any day. From a business perspective, I had two goals at the beginning. One was to you know, do transformational work with young people who would have otherwise been in crisis for most of their life. And the second one was to build a sustainable social enterprise business model that could fund that work. And so it's kind of all out the window now, honestly. Where we were at as of the month before the pandemic is we had just got to 90% self-funded. We were running businesses of this year. Our revenue was over $7 million, so it's not, you know, it's not small. Team of 120. So we have, you know, we've got some good we had some good businesses in there. But you know, of our 11 businesses, there's only 3 operational now, and you know, I think almost certainly we'll lose some businesses through this pandemic. So I think what we've shown is that we're strong at running good businesses. So we're you know, so much of the challenge of building these business models is that you've got such a tension. You're trying to do social good in often low margin industries. So it's a real balance to build these beasts of things. But I think we've got a really extraordinary team, and you know, at any given time, I've got kind of a little sandpit off to one side of innovation activities I'm always working on with some, you know, some sidekicks. And actually, you know, most of our innovation has always come from that sandpit. So, you know, that sandpit has got a lot of things in it. And not surprisingly, that's where our pivoting has come from in this pandemic. So the speeding up of some of that kind of eco-innovation stuff we're doing and the kind of farming activity, all of that was stuff that I had in train. It's just, it was a little way off. I handed over the reins of all the business as usual to a deputy CEO mid last year, and then took my long service leave for 3 months, left the organisation to its own devices for 3 months. And that was my clear break for that kind of first decade. And then I was coming back for the decade 2 of, you know, urban farming, you know, 2050 planning. And we as a board had done all of that planning. So we had a very defined, it was actually 2040 strategy, very defined 2040 strategy for the city by the end of last year. And then the pandemic hit. So So essentially, I probably feel like, so much of our 2040 strategy we're doing right now, so much of Moving Feast is really starting to do that strategy at warp speed. And that strategy had very much, building major collaborative food system projects, within the social enterprise system, and building that kind of food social enterprise system into an open innovation system. So I'm really interested in what does it look like to reposition this city as a kind of global social innovation capital of the world. What does it look like and putting the food system at the center of that. So the organization has got incredibly competent, management team who I could walk away now and the organization, would be in very, very safe hands. But I'm just warming up, I'm just getting ready for the next 10 years and doing some of my favorite work, of the last 20 years, actually.
Awesome. Well, I've got no doubt that the next 10 years will be just as exciting, if not more. Seems like there's a lot
extra curveballs with this damn pandemic and recession, climate change things. So it's not like we're going to be bored for.
No, we're certainly going to be busy.
We've got a few things we've got to fix in the next couple of decades.
Yeah. Hope you can run fast.
Only one speed.
So we're probably going to go over time. We normally wrap this thing up at 8, but there's a lot of questions in the chat still, and I'm still game to keep going. If anyone wants to,
I'm also happy to say if people wanted to go, just disappear. That's no problem.
Just before 8, maybe just so we can get that in there. Can you tell us about how your fundraiser that you're doing at the moment, and also how people can support that, and then also just other ways that people can get involved with what you're doing?
Yeah, so we've got a Chuffed crowdfunder happening at the moment. So the Chuffed platform, and if you just look for Moving Feast on there, we've raised about, I think we hit, I can't remember what it is, but it's about $650,000, I think, so far. And that's a combination of both short, medium and long-term work that we're doing. So we're doing some immediate food relief, the kind of stuff that we've been doing in halal meals and the food relief stuff as a system. Just this last, we've done, this week we will have done 60,000 meals in that system. So we've been cracking along at that, but I think most of us who are working together, and just to give you a sense of the types of organisations that are working with us, we've got Melbourne Farmers Markets and Series and Cultivating Community and Fruit to Work and Community Grocer and Kinfolk and Free to Feed. So, a lot of you would know a lot of those names. Asylum Seekers Resource Centre caterers. So really nice range of stuff, hopefully soon to be Farmwall. And so all of that stuff, I guess, most of us have been chipping away trying to build a fair and regenerative food system now for a really decent amount of time. If you take Series, Series has been doing this stuff for 40 years. So, they're, absolute legends in this space, through to young, startup, smaller social enterprises. But what I'm excited about, I guess, is when you put all of that kind of capability together, some pretty formidable, forces in there, and the ability to, if you start to map and link all of those supply chains, what does it look like when, a bunch of Sudanese farmers in Mildura who have got their first plot of land for the first time, through Farm Next Door, are connected in a food, in a supply chain with a whole bunch of, urban farmers here in the city, and also, food producers here that are doing great value-added product into the Melbourne market. And they can get line of sight for what we need. We know what crops they've got coming through the system, and what time their harvest is ready, and we can pay them for whole crops that we will buy. So they get kind of a very fair pay for their crop, but we get to have some amazing products that's seasonal and regional, and all of that kind of connectivity I think gets really exciting. So that kind of localizing the food system is a real possibility I think at the moment. I should also mention one of those partners is Open Food Network, and the incredibly amazing, awesome brain that Kirsten Larson is, who was an incredible food academic at Melbourne University and then decided to go across to become an applied food, operator and social entrepreneur as well. So there's just really good brains in there. Sorry, I don't even know if that answered the question.
Kind of.
Can you remind me what your question was? I'm sorry.
The main was the first part, like the chuffed.
Oh yeah. Sorry. I know. Let's just spread that in.
The organisations that are involved in that, so that's
So the organisations, So I guess what we're trying to do is we're funding both short-term relief work, but we're also funding that chuffed campaign work funds a lot of the integration work to build the systems and processes that link us all, the supply chain mapping, the platforms that we need to be able to get all of that line of sight of that produce. So we've just put money across into Open Food Network to build out their platform to give us line of sight of wholesale food coming through the regional food system. We've given money across to Community Grocer to build a kind of dignified food voucher system that you could essentially have if you had a card and that card was preloaded, you could go anywhere across this kind of ethical food system and buy for a really fair price. So we've got all sorts of kind of strategic longer term things that we're doing as well with the kind of projects, the projects that are being funded through Chuff, not just immediate meals, even though we've made a hell of a lot of them.
Yeah, awesome. It's something that excites me a lot, like hearing about that, the ability to there being a really strong network that supports people who want to make good choices, good buying choices when they're sourcing their food. But yeah, what's the best thing that we can, the individuals that people in this chat can do to help the cause? What would be your recommendation to someone who wants to get involved in this work and wants to know, or wants to support or get involved in this work somehow? Where would be the best place to start?
Yeah, look, when I talked about having that kind of sandpit off to one side that I'm always kind of playing in, that sandpit normally has some really unusual, unexpected, collaborators in there, and it could be artists, it could be tech people, it could be anyone really. And what we've done is we've mapped. So STREAT has a planet plan, and we've mapped hundreds of initiatives that we want to be working on in that planet plan. There's 9 different impact areas, and we've divided up a whole heap of work across the next decade into mini briefs. So there might be a mini brief on energy. There might be a mini brief on kind of waste and organic food waste. And so there's lots and lots of little projects in those. And what we're trying to build essentially is an open innovation system where a volunteer could come in and say, hey, I've got this skill, or I'm really interested in this area, or I've got, one day a week that I could come and give, or actually I'm holed up in the pandemic and I've got some extra time. Do you have some projects? And what we do is we kind of match really well skills of people quite well to some of those projects. So at the moment, for example, we've had about 4 or 5 volunteers working with us through the pandemic as part of Moving Feast, anywhere from supply chain mapping through to some comms and marketing stuff, through to I've got a amazing kind of global supply chain expert who's working on some stuff with us at the moment. So we've essentially just got all of these juicy little projects that are really bite-sized. If people have got some time, we can normally find the right kind of project, but often we like to do those as little groups, and sometimes it'll be stuff that can be just done kind of chipping away, and it can be very often done by someone at home, and it has to be obviously during the pandemic, but often we'll build a little innovation team around a specific project. So we've been doing a lot of tiny little innovation sprints through this pandemic, using just a lot of online kind of platforms like Miro. And we've been building, essentially just using that as our knowledge platform, and just, doing a little sprint of work for a number of weeks. And then, it's a learning sprint. Okay, what have we learned from that? What's the next bit of work we're doing? So yeah, if someone's kind of genuinely interested in getting involved, it doesn't have to be, it might not look like it, you've got a direct line of sight of your skill set and the things that we're doing, but it's always worth a conversation, because we often find some really interesting, I'm passionate about bringing a lot of diversity to any of our teams. And so, you'll equally find poets working with us as you will at, horticulturists. So yeah, that kind of, that I guess I'm, really passionate about open innovation systems. The more people we get kind of working in these really interesting ways, I think the more momentum we get, the more skill we get, the more, good solutions we get. So yeah, just drop me a line essentially on the Moving Feast email. Just go to the Moving Feast website, and whatever the email address is on there, sorry, I've forgotten, but it'll always come through to me.
Fantastic. Yeah, we had a question about that in the chat, how people can get in touch with you in regards to that. That sounds really, really awesome. Also, I really like the idea of I think, I can't remember. There's those kind of those really small teams and really large organizations like Boeing and stuff like that, where they have the capacity to just have these groups in their organization. I think it's called Scrum Works and stuff, where it's just a group of innovators and it's just making kinds of weird stuff.
We do a lot of, we always do that.
Yeah, and doing that in the social enterprise and food sector is so, the fact that that's going on is awesome, because that's,
I've got a book that's beside me every moment of this pandemic, which is all the food social enterprises I wish I had time to start right now. One of them I've started with my 12-year-old son, Will. So we've just got a little social enterprise side project happening on kids growing stuff. But, there's 20 ideas in there. If there's just a few more hours in a day that we could get on, and some of that stuff, it needs some background research. It needs some market testing. There's so many things that are just ripe at the moment, that just, need some good brains in the mix.
Absolutely. I've got a question, or a couple of questions from Mike here in the chat that I thought I'd just pass on. So, the first one is, who thought of the name Moving Feast? And the second one, which you've kind of talked about a bit, but maybe if you could just address this one quickly, is how well you work. So I guess how well Moving Feast and STREAT work with other food relief organizations like Fair Share or Oz Harvest, Second Bite, especially around the issues of the lack of culturally appropriate food and things like that.
First question first. So Moving Feast was my name. Really, I wanted a name that could show kind of that obviously there was an agility and a speed and a movement there, but also moving, obviously having a double meaning of, emotional, so it being, it had a double meaning, I guess, which was really important, that it was about doing good through the stuff that we were doing as well. And it was I normally lie awake in bed. I'm one of those people that, sometimes just for the fun of it, will buy a whole heap of URLs because I'll come up with a name for something and go, oh my God, that'd make a great name for a social enterprise. And sometimes actually the name or the ways that words work, is the inspiration for how some of those ideas fit together in the first place. So Moving Feast was an easy one. I'm having so much. I'm operating on very, very, very low amount of sleep right now. So remind me what the second part of your question was.
That's okay. That's okay. We've also been talking for an hour and 10 minutes now.
It's not that. It's one of these days I'll catch up on some sleep, but the pandemic's not the time to do it when there's just too many opportunities. So I'm so sorry. Remind me again.
So I'll read the question out. How well do you work with other food relief organizations like Fair Share, Some Second Bite? As you said, the lack of culturally appropriate food is a huge problem. So do all the organizations work well together to ensure that all communities are covered?
Oh, look, so, that first week of the pandemic when I speed dialed a bunch of social enterprise friends, I also speed dialed, Marcus Godino, the CEO of Fair Share. I speed dialed, the CEO of Food Bank. So we certainly know them. None of, the social enterprises that are all working as part of Moving Feast, none of them have a traditional role in the food relief system. So in that sense, we're coming into it in one sense fairly new. So knowing all the people, but our responses and our approaches are entrepreneurial social enterprises response rather than crisis response. So we're often doing kind of probably more systemic work than crisis work, often where it's kind of a bit more band-aidy. Having said that, Food Bank and those groups are obviously trying to work on the broader food security, issues that are there as well. And I've spent a lot of hours talking to those guys around just, my strong belief and theirs as well, that we need to be able to do better as far as culturally appropriate foods. One of the risks and challenges, I think, is that, the food relief system relies so heavily on donated food. So, if all of a sudden, they get a half a ton of baked beans, well, that's what people get given. And so it's not, they often don't get a lot of choice. They're relying on volunteer labor and donated stuff, which gives you often the choice that you would want in a system. So when I say, well, hang on it, we might do some short-term stomach filling, with some highly processed food that's got lots of sugar in it, but it does, we know that it's doing bad long term. And, yes, we're filling someone's stomach, but we're also creating diabetes at the same time. So I think often the food relief players, understand that they're quite often they can have their hands quite tied in doing long-term systemic work because they're so kind of at the mercy of the crisis response often or the donated stuff. So I guess that's one of the things I like about this little collective that we've got, because we're not really at the mercy of all of those same pressures. In the first week of the pandemic, we started planting 750,000 food plants. So when, this week when we've been harvesting, we've been harvesting our own plants to put into our culturally appropriate food boxes, we haven't had to go and beg for food off Coles and Woolies to say, by the way, can we put your seconds food in our food boxes? We're like, you know what? We've got amazing purple bok choy growing at Collingwood Children's Farm, and that's where we've got some stuff that's ready to harvest. Or we've got an amazing crop of kale right now down at, the regenerative farm at, Common Ground just out of Geelong. Let's go and get into go and start harvesting that. So I think what I like is, yes, of course, we're trying to do some really substantial work in the food relief effort, but we've also been by tying together both growing and feeding activities, it means we've been able to do a lot of growing and a lot of regenerative growing. And it's given us an ability to have a very, very high quality of produce. One of the things that often, is sad that you find is food relief food is often, the slops. You're making lots and lots of soups because the food quality is often really, poor. It's the food that no one else can sell or no one else wants. So in short, we know those guys, we know them well. In the case of some of them, we all want to work towards, food security and we want to see, but each of us have different business models that allow us to do different things, I guess. So we've got different strengths in the system.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That I thought, my initial thought might have been that there would be a bit more collaboration, but I guess like after hearing that makes a bit more sense that, that when you have different business models, you kind of operate in different ways and things. So thanks for sharing that. That's really, really interesting. Again, I mean, we're 15 minutes over time, so we can keep going at this point or wrap it up or whatever. But yeah, I did want to come back to something that you talked about earlier, if that's all good, which was the fact that Melbourne CBD is a lot more empty at the moment, and the potential there for a vacant city to be rejuvenated and rewilded, like you were talking about. I mean, that's sort of an idea that we've talked about at Farmall a bit. We have this, like when we're chatting about this kind of stuff, like talking about like car park buildings, for instance, like even before the pandemic, like the long-term plans for, or, sort of scope of the city and what a car park building will do in a city where people are taking self-driving cars or and more public transport, and more cars are blocked out of the city. What's going to happen to those buildings? Are they going to get turned into something useful? Can we turn them like water reserve, into spaces for rewilding? And it also made me think of Detroit, what you were just talking about, and what's happened there with sort of a city on its, a city that had its highs and back in the day, and then sort of was, there was lots of vacant land all about the city, lots of really cheap urban land in residential and urban, like kind of city areas, and the sort of urban farming renaissance that's been able to like come out of that city because of the access to cheap urban land that no one wants to use, or no one want to use, or whatever, or no one's developing there. So it gets the ability for urban farming to then flourish enabled.
Well, and I think we've got a really nice example of that right now, with Sky Farm stuff that biofilters, growing. It's exactly that example of, a great big car park that, has got less use now that, the city is changing and less cars in there. And so, you've got this amazing, great big space for, for an urban Sky Farm, where we've got 3 projects on the go at the moment for Rooftop Gardens. One that was already kind of underway when the pandemic hit and has been put on pause, but a couple more coming down the pipeline. But, there's more and more new buildings in the city that are, that straight away they'll be building, green spaces and gardens into those onto those rooftops. Obviously, the City of Melbourne has done a lot of work mapping, the possibilities for a lot of green roofs in the city, and what buildings, would be ideal for green roofs. So I think there's an appetite there at both the, City of Melbourne, local government level, but also, some of those, particularly some of the older buildings in the city, those ones that have very low star ratings, and they're looking often to start to think about their building in different ways. So we'll often end up in quite interesting conversations with unexpected, property companies going, do you want to talk about a rooftop? So I feel like there's some momentum starting, and it's been disappointing that Australia, I think, has been so far behind so many other countries in thinking about rooftop farming. But we've also got a hell of a lot of, ground-based, incredible stuff that could be done. I have a very good friend of mine is Jason Hornell, the CEO of Good Cycles. And, we do some plotting, and we're like, talking to him the other day, like, right, how much gardening equipment can you fit on a cargo bike? Right. So can you do this on a cargo bike? Can you build a farm that does this on a bike? And just starting to think about, the more cars and trucks and, vans that we get out of that city, that's new, gives us new farming opportunity as well. Mm-hmm. And what does that look like when we move all of that kind of city-based services to bike-based services? And so, you know, I really dream, you know, and I don't think it's far off, but I dream of, you know, a day when, you know, when you go around the city, just the same way as you have all of those tourism volunteers in their red polo shirts around the city, that there's a whole heap of, you know, young people, you know, the green team of Melbourne, and the green team are all these young, you know, young urban farmers that have come through being trained in organisations like ours and are all bike based, and the kind of green team that gets around the city, you know, tending to the city's urban farm. And, you know, it'll be them that are up, you know, harvesting the olive orchard on 101 Collins, or down on this rooftop down at the, you know, lemon grove, harvesting down there, and not to mention all the indoor plants across this, you know, in all of those buildings as well. So you start to think about all the growing possibilities that are in a city, and then all the training and employment opportunities that opens up for our most marginalized young people. You know, I'd want to be want to be a young green thumb in that city, you know, and I'd want to go to that city to go and be part of this rewilding of a city. So I think all of those spaces, you know, and particularly as the business models of all those big towers of power collapses, you know, because they're also dependent on, you know, rent at a certain price per square meter, it's just not going to be the same anymore. So I think that, you know, I think there's more and more people will start to get open to different ways of using their, you know, their property assets. And, you know, God hope we're some of the first in there to go, hey, let us talk to you about the farming activity we want to do in your building. And I mean, you know, Farmmore's done so many great experiments, like, you know, the stuff that you were doing in Sydney, you know, in the car park there, you know, you've got such a good track record of trying some of these things in, you know, in underutilized spaces, and goodness knows there's a lot of those around the city.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got big plans, big visions. I think we share a lot of the same kind of ambitions as you. So it's really awesome to hear you talk tonight. And I feel certainly very inspired, and I hope everyone else who has attended tonight as well has also felt inspired listening to Rebecca talk. Yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up. But, kind of wanted, are there any final words that you want to leave with, Beck, before we wrap it up for the evening? Or
just it's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you all tonight. I'm sure there'll be more conversations that get kick-started as a result of this, and just a thank you, I guess, from, you know, the farming family, I guess, of those of us who, you know, want to see our food system be part of the transformation that needs to happen in the world, and in there, you know, doing it. And then once again, congrats to the Farm Wall team. It's been so much fun to be on the journey with you all the way through lockdown, and now going back into lockdown. But, you know, we've got our fish in there and our microgreens growing, and, you know, been a real pleasure to be part of your journey as well during this lockdown. So thanks to you all. Hope you have a really lovely night, and I hope to one of these days be sitting around not a virtual table, but an actual table, sharing a meal with some of you as well.
We can dream.
Right. See you
all.
all.
Thank you so much, Beck, and have a great night, everyone. See you later.
Yes.
Bye.